Well, hi everybody. We are live again using the crazy old system that we were using yesterday for the special edition of the Stratosphere Lounge flash mob, which we're going to do very briefly today for about an hour, on account of we had such technical problems last time. Obviously, as you can see, I did not get the situation resolved as far as the player is concerned. Switch to high quality here and see if that chokes up everything. But I did find out what the problem is, and it looks like we'll be good for next time. It turns out that they turned into Wirecast, and turns out I also had Wirecast already installed on the system, so that was handy. I just didn't quite get it set up in time, so we'll get there. And just zoom this baby in, and we will get on with the business at hand. Hey, there you go. I hope everybody's doing well. Since I saw you last, it's been almost a whole 24 hours. Hey, look at that. Wow. And the worst produced show on the internet was actually being produced relatively well there for a while, and I decided, you know what, we just can't have that. Our reputation is slipping, and we need to get in there and screw something up. Whoa! Okay, so anyway, here we go. Yeah, it's a flash mob time, and I combed the hair, yes, and beat it into submission. So mostly I'm just doing this, like I said, because we had so many tech problems last time, but we should be back in high quality next time. Again, I looked at the pricing thing, and, you know, it's insane. They wanted, you get like 100 free viewer hours and 50 cents per person per hour after that, above that first 100. You can see that given a show like Stratosphere Lounge, that could turn into $15, $20 very easily. So I think there's a way for me to just kind of go on and have things be the way they are or were. Using Wirecast, but we're not going to waste a whole lot of time talking about that. Should get it resolved by next week, I hope. So in any event, no special effects or anything today, which is fine because you heard enough about that yesterday anyway. So does everybody hear me? Because somebody said they don't hear him. Gadsden Barb. But I guess, well, let's find out. Yep. Said they don't hear him. There we go. I'm being heard by myself, so that's good enough for me. Yeah, we're going to look at see if there's any new questions, and if not, we'll take some old ones. And I'm really going to be out of here by 7:10 at the latest, because I'm going to make this one short today. So I hope everybody's been doing well. Let's see what we got here under the those people who are paying close attention. Okay, so under our flash mob heading, we have John Galt CSA. Awesome. That's fantastic. And his first name, I think, that I've seen him, the first time I remember seeing him for a while. Anyway, here we go. Bill, you've spoken about entropy so many times, and you're a huge sci-fi fan, so you must have read Asimov's The Last Question, right? The best short story Asimov and I thought he ever wrote, the entire history of the universe in 11 pages. Care to discuss? John, is that, yeah, by the way, let me just post that up there. If you're not getting me, you might want to just refresh. I want to say that story is the one I read as a kid, and is The Last Question the one where they basically build ever more powerful computers, and this is basically where Douglas Adams got the whole supercomputer idea. We're going to ask it a question, and the answer is 42. But wasn't this a question with the universal AC, the cosmic AC, all of these other ACs, and all these different computers, and every couple of centuries or whatever, they ask an even bigger question. Finally, they get the ultimate computer, and they ask the question about the history of the universe, and the computer says, "Let there be light," and there was light, something like that. Yeah, I read that quite a long time ago, and I was obviously very impressed by it because I remember it pretty clearly. I have to tell you though, John, I tried to reread the Foundation trilogy, which I'd loved when I was younger, and I thought somebody had rewritten it under another name as a children's book. I couldn't believe how awful it appeared to me on the reread as an adult. Maybe it's because my expectations were so high. I know a lot. Foundation, I remembered a lot better than I remember the last question. But I was so stunned at how awful it seemed to be as a read. However, as you probably know, many times I've used the whole psychohistory idea and the Selden plan and the idea that history somehow has gone off the rails and we got to get it back on the rails, and also very intrigued by the idea that that this kind of darkness is coming, and we got to buckle down, and instead of it being 2,000 years of darkness, it's going to be 200 years of darkness or something like that. But in any event, you didn't miss a lot, Aesop. I think we probably missed 3 whole minutes of me talking about brushing my hair. In any event, I don't really have much more to say about it other than it may be that the last question was one of those ideas that's just so good that I just kind of internalized it and never really thought about it since then. But I can't say it's a story that I really have an awful lot to say about, to be perfectly honest with you. Sorry about that. Wish I could have given you a better answer. Hopefully it'll help a bit. Moving on, Eric Blake says, hey, Bill. Hey, Eric. Here's a Saving California question in honor of that recent event. You've talked a lot about the annoying, to put it mildly, trend of lefties leaving the crumbling economies of the blue states for the more prosperous red states, only to vote for the exact same policies that screwed up their old states in the first place. We all hate it, but how do we fight it? Let me make sure I'm recording here, just as a quick little aside. Yes, we seem to be. Okay. Seeing as there seems to be no way to really play defense on this, I say it's high time we give them a dose of their own medicine. Conservatives from solid red states moving into California and maybe New York, but especially California, turn their strongholds purple for a change. Obviously, our brave knights errant would have to be unmarried, because otherwise we have the issue of, I have my family to look after and I can't ask them to take on the financial burden of the taxes and the regulations, not to mention the real estate. So is my plan at all feasible, or is there some other way to fight the blue invasion? It's a great idea, Eric, and I always like the idea of going on offense. I've always hated the idea of just constantly slowing down this inexorable, retreat. But it certainly doesn't seem to be feasible in terms of California, because if you're talking about adding red dye to the existing blue dye, and you have a limited amount of red dye, then you're going to want the smallest flask that you can possibly get, right? If I have a swimming pool that's blue and I've got a cup of red, and I pour it into a swimming pool, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. If I have a thimbleful of blue and I pour in a cup of red, well, you're going to have a whole lot of things happening there. So by my analysis that way, California would be the worst possible place to try, because there are so many people here, and there are so many people that conservatives would have to overwhelm to turn this state red. Now, that said, anybody who's half a person, really, if you have any sense of identity, frankly, if you haven't done this, I don't know how you can face yourself. So everybody here certainly has played Risk before, right? The idea that there's a Stratosphere Lounge viewer who's never at least seen Risk or played Risk once or twice is just inconceivable to me. There's many different rules variations for Risk, but and the worst of which is the ever-increasing cards thing, by the way, which means that you can be down to your last territory, take one thing, and now that the game's been going on for 19 hours, you get 60,000 units or something. But in any event, I digress. When you're playing Risk, you have the entire board of all the territories in the world, and one by one, each player gets to pick a territory, and this goes round and round and round until all the territories are taken. I used to go for the three corners of America. I wanted North America so badly, but I realized that the soundest strategy is to lock up Australia and just build there and keep a base and just keep getting this constant two and let everybody else fight it out, and then come storming out of the Australian stronghold and essentially burn the world down. But I digress again. But in any event, in Risk, you get the entire map of the world and all the different territories, and one by one, everybody gets to pick which one they want, and it goes until the board is full. And because of that experience, which I've had so many times, I've often wondered what it would be like if the map of the United States was that way. And if the United States was up for grab between red teams and blue teams, I would pick California first. I'd pick Texas second, but I'd pick California first. If I had to start again, and we could have it, the first pick of the states in the Union, I'd pick California first. And if I couldn't get that, I might pick Washington State second, and because we need access to the ocean. I'm hoping if the progressives went first, they'd be just, in tears over it, but they would go with New York. But in any event, I have given a great deal of thought to the idea of this kind of dividing up of the country, which I can't see any feasible way for it to happen, although strange things have happened in the past. But if there was I'll just come out and say this. I know it's going to offend a lot of people. On some level, I would rather have California than any other 20 states combined, I think. I think California as a republic, as a conservative country, just California, would kick some butt. Because it's so amazing. Everybody's constantly saying, well, why are you here? Why are you here? I ask myself this all the time. And then I step outside and it's, 66 degrees and 12% humidity. And I'm contributing to the 12% humidity because if it weren't for me, it'd be 0% humidity here in Los Angeles. I meant to say humidity, actually, but you can see the great feat of prestidigitation I just did there. So California won't work. I have heard people say that Vermont is attractive, that Vermont is actually relatively conservative, and unlike California, Vermont is a small population. If you could take a movable number of conservatives, put them into someplace like Vermont, and keep it red, for quite a long time. You could do the same thing with any of these other states like Montana or Wyoming, which are already red because they're not filled with people. So the problem really isn't even turning the state red. The problem is being left alone. I know it's a sad thing to say, but I have given this some thought. I would, if one state were to secede from the Union and take the Constitution with it, that being the operative condition, obviously. If one state were to leave the Union and say, we're leaving the Union and we're taking the Constitution with us, because obviously the people who are running the federal government of the United States of America don't believe in this document anymore, so we are going to proclaim the Republic of whatever, I would move there instantly. And I think whatever state or states that were or was would rapidly be outproducing the rest of the country. And many times I think about this because the idea of having two different countries, a red and blue America, would really make my job a lot easier, make my life a lot more pleasant too. If you had a red America and a blue America, you would have very clear results in a very short time. You would basically say, okay, half of the country is going to run on the blue model, and the other half of the country is going to run on the red model. But make your choice now, because once you've chosen, you don't get to cross. You don't get to vote for California because you want to show everybody how much, your fundraisers for the Guatemalan water snake. You don't get to have all that virtue signaling, realize what a catastrophe it is, and then move. You have to decide, and then you have to stick with that decision. And if we were to have something like that, again, which I don't foresee happening, I can't imagine how it would happen, but if it did happen just for the sake of the thought experiment, we would we would be living in a very interesting place. It's actually very funny in a lot of ways, or charming anyway, to think about what would happen if it really was like, if there really was a case where there was like the North and the South. There were a lot of people during the Civil War, not a lot, but certainly some who moved, right? People who had Confederate leanings moved into the Confederacy, people with Union loyalties went north, and so on. Some of that happened, I don't know how much, but some of it did. But if you were to basically say to everybody, hey, look, you get to pick one or the other, what would you pick? Here's the blue model, here's the red model. I suspect most of the population would go to the blue model because most of the population is what makes up the blue model. Most of the city people would move to the blue country because that's where all the benefits would be. I don't think there'd be an awful lot of benefits in red America. There would be a safety net which would be designed to catch people so they didn't starve on the street, but it would not be a hammock, and we all know what we could do in a country of our own, I think. But then what gets interesting is what does life in those countries look like? What does it actually look like? Which is why it's such an interesting idea, such a great thought experiment. I can imagine the progressives thinking that over in red America, there's nothing but homosexuals being tied to the back of trucks and dragged through the dusty streets of our one-horse town, and and the toothless rubes sitting out there in their trailer parks, drinking moonshine and talking about Jesus. Not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way. The talking about Jesus drinking moonshine part, not the dragging homosexuals behind trucks part. There's something wrong with that. But I think what would really be shocking to them would be I think the first thing that would be most noticeable about the two different countries I think they'd both hit you at the same time. The first thing that would hit people after a year or two would be how safe it is in red America, how virtually, in fact, not virtually, how everybody's, living in neighborhoods where no one's breaking into houses and we don't have any crime because we enforce the laws and we hold people responsible and we're all heavily armed. So our red America would be a much safer place and a much friendlier place. It would be, to the surprise of liberals, but not to conservatives, it'd be a much more compassionate place as well. You'd have far fewer homeless people in red America, not because they'd be forced to work in the underground sugar caves, but because red America would look at, this is turning into an interesting idea, actually. I think I might have to make a firewall out of this. Red America would look at people who are, the expression that we used to use was a good expression, down on your luck. We'd look at people who are down on their luck and we would say, okay, well, this person is suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse or just plain laziness or whatever. They didn't know how to do things. Maybe they got a divorce. People fall down sometimes. And instead of keeping them down and constantly paying them to stay down, we would find a way to help them up, and we would personalize it. We'd do it through either local charities, things like veterans offices, things like Alcoholics Anonymous, church groups, all of this stuff. We wouldn't just basically hand them a check. So I think the first thing people would notice is how much more pleasant it is to live in red America, despite the fact that they would think otherwise. That they think that, nothing but the mean people in red America. That's not true. It'd just be nothing but the courageous people in red America. Now, a lot of smart people would go to blue America, but I am utterly convinced that the kind of smart people that you want to be around would be in red America. I suspect that we'll probably be seeing more scientific research done in blue America, but the engineering in red America would be far better. And since scientific results can be read, I'd rather have engineers with access to scientific papers than scientists who are depending on liberals to build things. So the smartest people I have ever met, and I've met a bunch of scientists, and I've met a bunch of very, very deep scholars and so on, but the two smartest people I've ever met are Burt Rutan and Brent Regan. They're both conservatives. They're both engineers. They're both just extraordinarily capable people. They changed the world. I know everybody's heard of Burt. Hardly anybody's heard of Brent Regan, but Brent Regan is the smartest guy I know. And Brent has his own property, needless to say. He built his own hangar. I suspect he built his own house. I'm not sure about that, but he built his own hangar in which he built his own airplane, which won both the workmanship and the speed awards at Oshkosh. It's a Lancer 360, I want to say, or 5. He's got a big engine. It's fast. It's 300-mile-an-hour airplane. It's a fast airplane, built in the hangar that he built, below which, well, I'm not going to say what's below it. It's a nuclear reactor, undoubtedly. And then he's got his own airport. He put in an airstrip, and he had to fight with the government for years to get that little piece of concrete legal. And his daughter went to, both of his sons are amazing. One's in the Marine Reserve. The other one's a video game developer. Terrific kids. His daughter, basically, I think when she turned 18, asked Dad if she could get a house. And what that consisted of was not, here's a house for you, honey, and then she has a temper tantrum because the stucco's not the color she wants. They went to a corner of the property, and the two of them built a house with their own two hands. They had some contractor help, but mostly it was them, and mostly it was the daughter. And I was, many years ago, Brent said, do you want to see the house? I said, sure, this will be cute, the house that the daughter's building. It's going to look like a, Lincoln log construction set, maybe a little bit bigger, big enough maybe for one room and perhaps a little bathroom attached to the back, And it's a 4-level, most beautiful house I've ever seen. Incredible open area, open ceilings, wood, very, very eco-smart in terms of insulation techniques and so on. It's because Brent and his daughter, mostly his daughter, built the house. And it's the coolest house I've ever been in. It's the most beautiful house I've seen. It's so clean, and it's so efficient, and it's so perfectly wired, and the floor is heated with underground pipes. And it's just what happens when you have a house built by two people who have IQs of 180 or whatever the case may be. I went over there and I just said, I'm not entirely sure I could put the doorknob in by myself. So that aspect of life in Red America would be much better too. I think the second thing that people would notice right away, aside from the fact that Red America is a much more pleasant, friendly place to live, I think we'd also realize right away that the entertainment quality in Red America is not what we were used to. And I can sum up my feelings on this in this way. I would rather listen to engineers sing than drive on a bridge built by professional vocalists. There are some talented conservatives out there, and we would have some entertainment, but we would have nothing like what Blue America would have in terms of the entertainment. Now, that's something that could be also remedied, and it would something I would trade in a heartbeat. I don't think Red America wouldn't be one giant community theater presentation of Oklahoma, but it would start out fairly close to that, I would imagine. we'd get most of the country musicians. I think virtually all of them. Those are extremely talented people. There are certainly enough conservative filmmakers of every single possible capacity. My entire future model is, Merlin says I'm an engineer and I sing excellently. I have no doubt whatsoever, Merlin. I can pop a tune if I have to as well, if I practice for a year or two. But I think the biggest immediate negative would be in the quality. I was going to say in the quality of the entertainment, but the fact is, here in mixed America, there's so many progressives making so much entertainment, and we don't watch it anyway because while it's beautifully made, but most of it is beautifully made junk. Star Trek Discovery, just as an example, I can't put those two words together in the same sentence. I know somebody actually seems to like Star Trek Discovery. The whole thing is a distortion in the space time. It just shouldn't be there. It's so appalling. It's so disruptive. It's the Bolshevik revolution of the Star Trek canon. It's something that just came and happened and destroyed everything. It needs to be buried in Yucca Mountain, deep in Yucca Mountain, and we need to invent one of those Men in Black flash things so we can all just stand there and just get this thing flashed out of our mind. So I don't care how many high quality people are working on that kind of garbage. But other shows like Walking Dead and things like that are, terrific. Again, entertainment is importable in a way that bridges and security and peace of mind and politeness are not importable. Those are not things that you can go on the market and buy, but you can buy whatever entertainment you want, and they'd better be selling it because I'm not entirely sure what else they make. I don't think they make much of anything in terms of manufacturing. We lose an awful lot of tech people, I suspect. But again, the people that actually make these things would be there. I think the visionaries would probably end up in Red America because they at least start a new business in Red America without it bankrupting you. And the blues would probably keep all of the existing, Bill Gateses and all of the Google people and all of the Facebook people and all the rest of these people that are turning into absolute tyrants. So anyway, that's kind of the overview. But the problem is if you look at the map, the center of the country is red, as Hillary Clinton pointed out, filled with backward people who really just long for days of return to slavery and all the rest of the things she said. But any possible distribution of the country along those lines, along red and blue lines, would seem to look like we'd get the middle of the country, and the left would get the coasts, because the coasts are where the expensive real estate is, and that's where the liberal elites are, the rich lunatics. We'd feed them. That's a nice lever to have. But frankly, I don't see how you could live in a landlocked country. I don't see how you could live in the United States of America that's surrounded by the socialist states of America, where you had to overfly their territory in order to get into our territory to land, and say nothing of things like navigation of rivers and so on. I suppose if we kept Louisiana and Mississippi, we could, keep the Mississippi open and stuff. But we'd need some seaports. So I had thought about maybe a Southern California corridor where we would basically either negotiate or ask very nicely for Orange County and San Diego County. Give us a 50-mile, whatever it is, access to the sea that would allow us to keep San Diego Naval Base. Orange County is actually very smart, very sensible, beautifully run, just like you'd expect from Republicans. San Diego is probably America's most conservative large city because there's so many military people there. It still votes blue, but it's winnable. I'd love to keep. I'd love to keep. In fact, I think it's essential that we keep Pacific base in San Diego, and I think we ought to keep Virginia and keep Norfolk, and then we'll have a navy, and they won't. And they can confront pirates or Chinese warships with dance numbers and songs and very, very serious and impassioned diatribes that they really don't have any argument with the pirates, and that they feel a great deal of sympathy because of all they've been through and all the oppression and so on. So that's basically it. Fun to think about, but I don't know really what it is beyond that. Okay, let's see, moving on here. Merlin Wendebo of the sonorous voice says, well, seeing as there was no question area, I thought you were just going to take questions from yesterday. Well, turns out that you made an assumption there, Merlin. And you know what happens when you make an assumption, when you assume something, right? Known miscreant Matthew Lloyd is here, and he says the Pope just announced that hell does not. I just read that as the Pope just announced that hell doth not exist. He wrote, does not exist. What does that mean for Catholicism and for Western culture more broadly? Did he actually say that? Did the Pope act? I'm going to assume that's true, because this particular Pope is a communist Pope. I'll bet you John Paul II is doing 2,000 RPM in his grave. I mean, here's a man who basically helped defeat communism, grew up under communism, John Paul II, and now this guy's bringing in all the communism he can possibly get. Look, I have a hard time personally with the idea of hell, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so it turns out the Pope did not actually say that, says quick little coin. But let's just say that that he did, because it's an interesting subject, hell. I can't imagine. Let's take the surviving person, who is the biggest, and I mean this sincerely, the biggest victim of injustice that you can imagine. So let's take somebody whose entire family, mostly children of his or hers, died horribly in the Holocaust. And this doesn't take much imagination, because there's a number of those people actually lived, and most of them are gone now, obviously. In fact, all of the parents are gone. But let's say that you're a person who lost everything that you care about in the Holocaust, and you got your hands in the afterworld on Adolf Hitler, and you threw him in boiling oil. And this would be extremely satisfying and fun thing to do, and you could sell tickets and make a fair amount of money, I would imagine. But the question I have to ask myself is, even the most harmed person in the world, I cannot imagine a person who could watch, yes, Adolf Hitler, in a boiling lake of fire for much more than 5 or 10 minutes. I suspect after that time they would simply say, okay, that's enough. And the reason they would say that's enough is because they're not Adolf Hitler. They would if they said, if you were given, if this man was in boiling oil forever, for days or years or eternity, essentially, and you have the power to let him out if you forgive him, I don't think there's a person with a soul alive that could take an awful lot of that until they would finally, even at the expense of their sanity, perhaps say, okay, that's enough. That's enough. And that's why Hitler is Hitler, because he never had that ability, and he's not alone. There's millions of people that don't have the ability to say that, no, that's enough. Don't, you know, there's revenge, and then this is just, I can't bear to watch it, and I can't bear to be responsible for it. It's kind of like the people who walk away from O'Malley's thing. Comes a point when it's like, okay, I'm not going to be party to this suffering, no matter how much has happened to me. So I bring up the Lake of Fire only to say that this is the kind of traditional view of hell, and kind of the Catholic vision of hell that may or may not be the. All the Catholics are going to leap in now, but basically, whether that is what the religion actually says hell is, that is what a large number of people throughout history have perceived it to be. Let's just put it that way. And I don't believe that that kind of hell is possible, because if there is a God who created the hell, then if the average human being has enough mercy and decency in them to prevent this kind of endless torture, then I suspect that loving God would have that quality as well. Much better idea about hell is the idea that, as many people have pointed out, is that hell is a disconnect from grace. That it's an afterlife that's not so much filled with boiling oil so much as it is this is an interesting thought. I don't really know where I'm going with this. What I was going to basically say is that it seems to me like that version of hell would be a world of unredeemed pride, where you basically, and I mean this sincerely, I suspect Harvey Weinstein's life prior to this meltdown, and certainly after it, was a species of hell where, and most of the people in Hollywood, back of the orange wall there, live in a version of this world where Merlin says hell is actually standing outside the gates of heaven looking in. I think that's well said, actually. I think that's quite well said. You have to... I have no pity for Harvey Weinstein at all. I could certainly watch him in the boiling oil for 20 seconds, I would think. He has none of my sympathy. I find him a loathsome individual. I find him one of the worst people in modern times, and representative of many thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in show business who are exactly as bad as he is. But his life must be really particularly an awful life, even when he was living at large. And this is why movie stars are so unhappy. This is why so many celebrities are so unhappy. Do you ever wonder why Jennifer Aniston can't seem to stay married? Don't you find that a little odd? How Jennifer Aniston is just constantly being dumped by everybody? I don't find Jennifer Aniston to be a particularly unattractive person. You would think that Jennifer Aniston would be perfectly capable of landing quite a good man and keeping him. But she can't, and she doesn't. And she doesn't because she can't. And she can't because Jennifer Aniston's world is the world of Hollywood. And this is the greatest curse that can befall a person, I think, especially a person like the kind of people that go into show business, people like me. The people that seek fame and celebrity, some small percentage of them can recover from this. I feel like I'm making progress myself in this regard. But basically, the people that are in it for the fame instead of for the art are in it to fill a hole in them that wasn't filled by parents. That there was some enormous emotional hole in their childhood that left them with a sense of not only of inferiority, but really almost a sense of not even really being here, a sense of almost like a vapor, that they're not really here. And the self-esteem is essentially non-existent, and so you'll do things to overcompensate for this and start to lead a very prideful life. And if you happen to be good-looking enough and talented enough, or talented enough to become somebody like a movie star, let's say, then your curse is complete. Because if you're a person who has no inner happiness and has no core of happiness inside them, if you are just basically a giant walking black hole of need, and God knows I've met a few of those people, and I've been one for most of my life. If you're one of those people, then the worst thing that can happen to you is to get everything you ever wanted. And the reason that's the worst thing that can ever happen to you is because you can at least survive thinking that, okay, I'm miserable now, but if I made more money, I'd be happy. If I had a nice car, I'd be happy. If I owned this airplane, I'd be happy. If I had a big house, I'd be happy. If I was famous, I'd be happy. All these things would happen. I would be happy if these things were to happen. This is the curse of people who don't have internal happiness. They're always looking for something on the outside. And as long as there is something on the outside to hope for, you can continue to struggle along and sleepwalk your way through your life, assuming that, okay, maybe I'll eventually get the car that I want, or the house that I want, or the money, the amount of money that I need, or the fame, or whatever. And when I get those things, I'll be happy. And that's how you go through life, and most people never get those things, so that just kind of gets you through. It's just like, it's like methadone, I guess. But when you get to be one of these people like Jennifer Aniston, you've gotten all of it. You're famous, you're rich, you're beautiful. Jennifer Aniston must know that she can have just about any single man in the world, and a significant portion of the married men as well. So she's not hurting for partners. And so why is she constantly alone, and why is she constantly dumped? Who dumps Jennifer Aniston? You want to know who dumps Jennifer Aniston? I would. You would too. Happily married now, but 3 years ago, I'm not saying I would have dumped her in, 3 days or anything. But eventually I would have, and it probably would have taken a month or two. Because there comes a point when you begin to realize that it doesn't matter how beautiful you are, or how sexy you are, how attractive you are, you cannot live with a person like this. And bone canoe, hang in there. We're all on a journey. The fact that you're here means you're going to get there. Don't you worry. You just relax. He says he's describing him or somebody. He's trying. I have to read this comment. I feel like Bill is describing me, or at least the kind of person I'm fighting not to be. Buddy, if you're fighting not to be that person, you're not that person, and you won't become that person. Trust me on this. It's not easy, but you'll get there. The fact that you can ask a question like that, the fact that you have that self-awareness, means it's not going to happen to you. Don't worry. So I have, prior to finding happiness inside myself and then finding the person who actually multiplied that happiness enormously, infinitely, but I did go through a period of 5 or 6 years there when I started to get a little famous and was hanging out with a lot of Hollywood celebrities, and I dated a few movie stars and TV stars. I actually did, I think 4 of them. I would say 4 names that you would recognize, or certainly you could Google and find pictures of. And I don't want to make this about any one of those individuals, but as a general rule, they're very interesting, they're very glamorous, and that means exciting. They're very attractive, and they're very intense. And all of these things are terrifically exciting in the first couple weeks or months. But what you find is, especially in one case I'm more familiar with than others, um, you find that you will never be happy because that person will never be happy and can never be happy. And and you find that you spend more and more of your time shoveling coal into this furnace of need, and the more coal you shovel, the more coal they expect the next day, and it comes a point when it's like you rapidly get exhausted. You simply say, I can't do this. I can't do it anymore. I can't, not that I can't, I don't want to. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to be, um, I don't want my whole life to be nothing but argumentation about things that shouldn't even be discussed. I mentioned this on the show a few times before, but when I was a limo driver, um, this would be when I was around 91, 92. Um, I almost never did celebrities. I took people to and from LAX, businessmen mostly, in Lincoln Town cars, to and from LAX from Pasadena area. But one night, I went and I picked up two people from Pasadena Playhouse where they'd done a reading, and I recognized both of them, and that's because one of them was Meredith Baxter Birney, um, who most of you recognize as the mom on that show. What show was it? Was it? God, I can never remember. Was it the Michael J. Fox show? Hang on. What was she in? Um, Family, Family Ties. That's the one with Michael J. Fox, I think. In any event, um, Meredith Baxter Birney and the person she was with, I was actually much more interested in, and that was an actor named Dan Hedaya, who's been in a bunch of interesting stuff, including Buckaroo Banzai and I want to say Blood Simple. So anyway, so I was driving them from Pasadena to her home in, well, it must have been Brentwood or someplace like that. It was about a 45-minute drive nighttime. And she got in the car. I didn't say a word. I never said one syllable. I didn't utter a single syllable, but it was a town car. It was, if it had been a stretch, they would have put the divider up, and I wouldn't have blamed them. But, sometimes people, one of the great things about being a limo driver is there are times when people just simply assume that you're part of the upholstery and will speak to each other as if you're not there. And most of the time that makes sense, because most of the time those limo drivers don't go on to become world famous internet celebrities. I'm not mentioning me or anything. I'm just saying sometimes that can happen. And these stories don't get retold. But in any event, I drove them for 45 minutes. And she got in the car and she said, I was just terrible. And Dan said, no, you were fantastic. No, I was terrible. I'm start driving. No, it was great. Everybody loved you. I looked so old. No, baby, you look absolutely wonderful. The crowd hated me. No, the crowd loved you. You remember all the applause when you said this line? I just think I've never been I've never been worse in my life. No, I've seen you. It went on and 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 on. It didn't stop. It was 45 minutes of Dan Hedaya shoveling coal into the gaping black hole of need that was Meredith Baxter Birney. Nothing personal, Meredith, by the way. You're just one of thousands of famous people who are built that way. And within 10 or 15 minutes of this, you realize, I think I'd like to date this person less than anybody in the world. I think she came out gay, so it's not going to be really much of a problem, but for me or anyone else. But in any event, this is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people whose insecurity level is so high that it just needs constant reinforcement, not just not just passive reinforcement like, hey, nice job, or you look beautiful. Constant, never-ending, ongoing reinforcement, and no matter how much of it you do, they're never happy. They never get to the point when they go, oh, really? I guess I was good. So, so that's a special hell, is to be rich, famous, desirable, because you then have everything you thought that you would, you have everything you thought that would make you happy, and you're more miserable than ever. And so they keep raising the stakes. They keep they keep having to up the intensity. It's like any other addiction. You know, the guy who is the character I mentioned. I wanted all these characters in my video messages, the computer graphics guys, to be based on people who are actual people. And the character I named after the executive officer, after the character I'd like to get Alfonso Rachel to play, I named Gary McCullough, because Gary was the guy who was the kind of the center of the story of The Corner, which is a story about a year in the life of drug dealers in the heart of Baltimore. And why did I give him this name of all the names I could have chosen, especially Black Americans? Why did I choose Gary McCullough? I chose him because he's the most just terribly tragic example of what could be and what wasn't. And Gary McCullough died of a drug overdose because he had done so much heroin and so much cocaine that he built up such a resistance. He went clean for quite a while. When he finally went back out and started using again, he gave himself the kind of dose he used to have, but his cells weren't ready for it anymore, and he just killed him. And this is, so you find in Hollywood that, okay, so it wasn't the car. So now I need, maybe it'll be 8 cars, or maybe it'll be, instead of this $600,000 car, maybe what I need to be happy is a $3 million car, or whatever. And then the reason that so many of these Hollywood relationships don't last very long is there's also, well, the reason I'm not happy is because I haven't met the right person. Have you ever noticed how few celebrities date, are married to real people, and that as a percentage of celebrity marriages, those tend to be the most stable ones, the people who are married to non-celebrities? Hugh Jackman seems to be a great example of that. He's got to be the most charming guy in the world, and I don't know how long he's been married. I want to say it's 34 years, something like that. That's because Hugh Jackman is a celebrity who doesn't have a gaping hole of need in the middle of him. Something else drove him there. I don't know how he got there, but I'm glad he did. You can count a number of people who are like that. And strangely enough, and this will do it for me for the night, of the many, many wonders in my life, and they just continue to keep coming. And I ain't done yet, by the way. I actually got a chance to be, I wouldn't say friends with Clint Eastwood, but I certainly had a chance to talk with him on several occasions, and had Clint Eastwood call me over and tell me thought I was doing a really great job, and do I golf and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm showing off, absolutely. I'm very proud of that, and needless to say, Clint is a conservative, and all the rest of it. But the reason I bring up Clint Eastwood is because I went through a stage where I binged watched all of the Twilight Zone episodes. Just not all at one session, but just that's all I watched. I watched 3 or 4 of them, and then the next night I watched another 3 or 4 or whatever. And especially in the first season, there's a lot of these all-American, super clean, 60s, early 60s blonde women, blonde actresses. And 1 or 2 of them, and they're all like Anne Francis, but some of them but most of them you don't. And they were just so striking to me and so attractive in a way that I ended up, after every episode, I'd see one of them, and I'd look them up on IMDb. And many of them had already died. A few of them were still alive. But the one thing that 80% of them had in common was they had all dated Clint Eastwood at one point or another. And the reason I bring all this up is because Clint Eastwood strikes me as a guy who has actually done a fair amount of dating in Hollywood, but who does not strike me as a person who has that need to be loved and admired by people. In fact, I know he does not have the need to be loved and admired by people. He's one of the few people in Hollywood who do the work for the sake of the work. And I don't think Clint much cares whether people go to his movies or like his movies. I think he makes his movie because it's something he wants to say, and I don't think it much worries him what people think about him. He's Clint freaking Eastwood. Why should he care what people think? But in any event, yeah, that's that. I think that'll do it. Hey, it's 7 o'clock. So it's a little freebie show that I decided to just do because I was so embarrassed about starting a half hour late last night with something had changed. I think we'll be back to our former glory next week, and I think we will maybe looking a little bit better image quality wise. So that'll do it, folks. Thanks for joining us for this quick little flash mob session. It's a small little token of my regret for the errors yesterday, and for those of you stuck around, we started about half an hour late yesterday. So this will do it for episode number 181. We should be back to our regular selves back in next week on next Wednesday, and I will have some more updates on all kinds of other things, as always made possible by the paying members at billwhittle.com, and my gratitude to you folks is endless, and not the least of which for your seemingly endless supplies of patience. So there's that too. All right, well, as I say, thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you next week.